Hello, and welcome to this episode of China Now, our semi-regular discussion series about contemporary Chinese politics and current events. Um, if you are in the audience and would like to ask a question or make any kind of comment, please do so via the Q&A tab, which on most Zoom platforms is at the bottom of your screen. If you click on that at any time, you can write your question there, and we will answer it when we come to the question and answer time. So thank you, Alice, for doing this again. And what are your thoughts on the uh, fourth plenum that ended last week?
I would say like probably the key word for this plenum was like self-reliance. Like a lot of things happened. I mean, like last time we were talking about purges, and during this plenum, like we saw how the final the official communique confirmed the expulsions of 11 full Central Committee members. Also, we connected to Xi's effort to battle corruption. We also saw that General Jiang Ximing has been appointed as the new vice chair of the Central Military Commission. And again, these flags the Xi's continued like efforts in his campaign against corruption at the heart of the PLA leadership. But then when I said self-reliance could be like really the key word for this plenum is because it seems to me, I don't know what you think about this, but it seems that economic security has become like really central. I remember previously really the focus was on increasing domestic consumption, and there was a focus already on technological self-reliance, but I feel like with this plenum really the direction is much stronger in this sense. So it seems that it has taken quite a distinct direction and departure from every plan since a very long time. And it seems that the forthcoming 5-year plan will really concentrate on economic security, and like it will probably elevate it to an equal standing with profit creation, with wealth creation. I don't know what you think about this, but it seems to me like the main focus was to decrease the dependence on foreign suppliers for advanced technologies and really become much more self-reliant on the front. And this is quite novel. I mean, like there's always been recently a focus on technological advancement, but this, security dimension in this sense, like it seems that is particularly stressed this time. What do you think?
Um, I'm not sure because I should note that as we're recording this on the 30th of October in 2025, I have not yet seen, and I don't think it's been released, the full text of anything
Mm.
close to a comprehensive summary, even of what will be in the 15th five-year plan, due to kick into effect next year. But what I tend to think from what I've seen so far of what has been released from the plenum of Xi Jinping's comments that he's made publicly that have been touted in some of the Chinese media, it seems actually of a piece with two strategies that have been actually in place for some time. Even if some of the gloss around security is indeed novel, as you've noted. So on the one hand, I think there has been since probably 10 years ago almost an idea that it's important to reach this goal of so-called basic socialist modernization by 2035, and that in order to do that, there was a strategy adopted that's supposed to run over three five-year plans, right? The 14th, the 15th, and the 16th, and that would eventually bring this about. And so the 14th five-year plan, there's a lot of talk now retrospectively about it as from the perspective of saying it succeeded greatly, at least in the eyes of Chinese leaders, at eliminating absolute poverty, at reducing some measures of inequality, at achieving some environmental protection goals, and at forging ahead in certain areas of industry. And from what I've seen of the talk about the 15th five-year plan, the 15th five-year plan is meant actually then to seize the opportunity, to seize this moment, right? There's a sense, according to the Chinese media reports about what Xi Jinping has been saying about it, there's a sense, it appears, that China sees itself as being at this kind of inflection point, and that by pushing ahead with higher technology, China can actually become the leader in some areas of technology rather than simply the adopter or the follower, right? And so by doing that, it's actually also of a piece with a strategy that's even older, right? If we go back 15 years ago, almost, to this idea of the Made in China 2025 documents that have now sort of disappeared. They disappeared about 5 or 6 years ago, as we started to get closer to 2025. But that strategy basically said China needed to upgrade to higher value added kinds of production and manufacturing in particular. And so by doing that, it could achieve a leading position in key technologies, but it could also then generate higher incomes for people in those sectors who could then consume more, right? So the part of the challenge, I think, for China that is recognized at the top levels in the government and in the party is that in order to keep employment high and to keep increasing employment opportunities at pace with new entrants into the labor market, there has to be a continued focus on manufacturing. And focusing on manufacturing means lots of investment and lots of work in that area that isn't services and consumption and so on. But at the same time, if you're going to raise incomes and promote consumption, that manufacturing has to move into higher value added sectors. And so I think that's the strategy that's basically been chosen for some time now, is to look at higher technology, higher value added manufacturing as a way to grow employment, increase incomes, and then as a knock-on effect, create greater opportunities for consumption, right? As more people have jobs with higher incomes. So I don't think it's all about security now in a way that it wasn't before. But I think becoming a leader in key technologies is important from the perspective of its leadership for China's government and for the Chinese state. But I think it also presents a bit of a security challenge to others who had been leading before. And so a lot of the security gloss, I suspect, may be more from the outside looking in, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, with this strategy, which you outline, like, I agree on this absolutely. I mean, it almost requires like a very careful balancing act, like because now I guess now like what will happen going forward is that they will need to make advanced manufacturing the kind of like one of the main drivers, if not like the main driver of growth, but then at the same time, not undermining the overall economic expansion or like eroding household wealth. So like this will certainly require like an attentive and careful balancing act. And I'm thinking also connected to this, I mean, this is particularly difficult because I mean, obviously, I mean, because of China's political system, there's no political competition. There's no like in terms of like elections, but to the party. But then at the same time, I mean, there has been discontent. I mean, especially among the youth, like the younger generations, that's been registered recently. So I mean, this balancing act, I guess, like we need to be handled very carefully because I mean, these new generations, they're facing, I mean, financially, I think like situations and challenges that their parents didn't have to change for it to face, for example, and therefore, I think like in face of like the the discontent and the growing also generational inequality, this strategy will need to be very carefully, enacted and like handled. So I don't know. I hope like I think like this has been taken into account and like this will be the case. But I think also almost presents a kind of risk in the sense if things go wrong, not necessarily too wrong. I think is enough that they don't go very well, but because the level of discontent, especially amongst the youth, is already quite high, right? And also, I mean, uh, I guess also this focus on security, which, as you mentioned, is not like complete novelty. I wonder also like how connected that is like on like more widely to the concept of self-reliance, because I mean, even like as we saw recently with the ASEAN-China Summit, right? I mean, it seemed to me that the focus was very much on, like this new agreement and like diversifying, China's trade partners and like strengthening partnerships with other actors that are not the US. And like it seemed to me that this was another attempt to like strengthen self-reliance. So I wonder if maybe like this focus, like I mean, not necessarily only on security, but like in general on like technological advancement, if that can be included in this framework of like self-reliance and like, as you say, transitioning from like just being, a receiver of like norms that have been made by the US or other powers to becoming like really the main driver in certain technologies. I'm thinking about AI, for example. So yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that there's something to that, and I think that does then pose a certain risk from a security perspective to sort of existing powers or existing leaders in some of those fields, whether that's Japan or the US or South Korea or Europe, depending on what the technologies are. One thing that I think is really interesting about the ASEAN summit, though, that you brought up, is the way that it's sort of jockeying for position that happened at that summit. So, we saw on the one hand the US actually trying to cut deals or increase its ties with key Southeast Asian states for supply chains of certain things that the US needs and isn't ready to start producing itself. Although it could in some cases, like rare earth minerals, right? So Malaysia has large endowments of these minerals, but hasn't really mined many of them. Thailand is a major center for refining and smelting of rare earths, but the US is not doing a lot of trade with Thailand in this key area. And so there's a push, I think, from the US to start expanding those relationships, to start working sort of multilaterally with Japan and other technology manufacturing countries that use a lot of rare earths but also don't produce them and have relied largely on exports from China for those key inputs to begin sort of developing these critical mineral links in various parts of the world and in particular in Southeast Asia. But then there's another push from China to say they want to increase and expand and deepen the China ASEAN free trade area, right? And also the general free trade agreement that China has really pushed and really done very well from with all of Southeast Asia across the board. And I think, what this sort of comes down to is the fact that economically, Southeast Asia cannot walk away from China, and China cannot walk away from Southeast Asia. And the US and Japan and others are trying to prevent that embrace from being too tight and to use leverage in Southeast Asia as a way to sort of get around China on certain areas that they consider of importance economically or security wise, notably in this case, rare earths. Does that make sense, or did you see other elements to this summit as well?
No, absolutely. And I think like I absolutely agree with you. And I think like especially on rare hearts, like I think like China, on the other hand, I mean, China is certainly like reliant on Southeast Asia and Southeast Asia and China. And I think like that's why China was so like clear and like put so much focus on like also expanding the agreement and like emphasizing as well like the pan-regional approach, et cetera, et cetera. Like I think that reflects exactly this thing. But also I think that China is also aware, and I think it has demonstrated it also in the past, and also like in recently, like in these past few days with the EU, that especially on rare hearts, they have like a very strong leverage and like negotiating tool. I think like I mean China has recently banned key exports of raw materials for the EU, and also I think with the meeting that Xi Jinping had this morning with Trump, I think there as well, wise they agreed on not banning certain materials. I'm sure that like some others are still banned. I think at least seven others. So I think like on the one hand, like China is, I mean, certainly is aware of this dependence on Southeast Asia, and like I think that's why also like I mean it puts so much focus on things like the this expanding agreement. But then on the other hand, I think they are also aware of the fact that specifically on rare hearts, like they have a lot of power in negotiations, and they're not afraid to use it. And I think that is like emerges in quite a powerful way with I mean the US and also the EU, and like the way China is kind of asserting they are a big player in the game also in this sense. Um, and also I think like you mentioned how like Trump has expressed its interest to like kind of like deepening ties in this sense with Japan. I think like this is I mean this I think can be inserted like in probably like a wider strategy. I think it's been like I mean it really precedes Trump the probably the attempt to strengthen ties in with other I mean, partners in the Indo-Pacific I'm not saying countering China, but like to find alternatives, let's say, or like if we want to use the word like to de-risk from China in this sense, especially in these sensitive sectors. So I think that can be kind of like seen in this way as well. Um, and yeah, and I think also like I mean, the meeting this morning between Trump and Xi Jinping kind of like reflected this. I mean, I was very struck by how short the meeting was. It was like less than an hour. So probably a lot of things had already been decided in advance, I imagine. But I think this, I mean, I don't know what are your thoughts on this, but I don't think this reflects this huge deal, like this huge success that Trump seems to advertise. I think is it leaves things pretty much like they were before. Probably like a good I mean a good result that the US got out of this is like China lifting the ban on certain rare hearts. But I don't know what you think of this, but I think like probably the majority of things have been decided before, and like my impression, I mean now it's still very fresh news, but like it seems to me that it also almost leaves things as they were before.
Yeah, I think that's basically right. I agree with that. In essence, I think what was agreed today was a face-saving route for Trump to climb down from some of his most reckless positions on tariffs and other sort of trade restrictions with China. So, I've been thinking for a while that if the US wants major trade concessions from China, the US will probably have to give China significant security concessions. And that wouldn't really be worth it from the US perspective, right? So it's not really going to work. work, right? There's no way that the U.S. is going to be able to get the kind of trade concessions from China that Trump has talked about, and that actually Joe Biden talked about, even Bill Clinton used to talk about, right? I think it's very unlikely that China would give up that much on trade without security concessions from the U.S. that, frankly, the U.S. is almost certainly not willing to give and probably shouldn't give from the perspective of U.S. national interest. But if that's not going to happen, you're not going to get that much. And so what Trump has been doing essentially since the first term with China is going crazy with tariffs and trade restrictions, right? Provoking trade war in order to try to force trade concessions from China. But I mean, in this sense, the American side has really overplayed its hand, right? They're not holding all the cards as Trump thinks he is, right? And because of that, they're not going to get it. They're not going to get the serious concessions that they're hoping for. So what they seem to have agreed now is that Trump would walk back some of the most egregious tariffs, and China would then, you know, walk back some of the retaliatory measures and start, buying sorghum and soybeans from the U.S. again, which is very important to the U.S., although there are alternative suppliers that China has for those things. And so it doesn't hurt China that much simply to buy from countries like Brazil or Argentina instead of the U.S. It's a little bit more costly, but not that much. And then also to forestall some of the export restrictions on certain rare earths, as you pointed out. So I think it's essentially just a way to kind of paper over the fact that Trump imposed all these measures to try to force concessions. He couldn't get any concessions, so now he's backing down from some of the measures, and China's backing away from what it was doing in retaliation. And it allows Trump to go out and claim it's a big success. And it allows the Chinese side to say, oh, we've reached an agreement, we have a framework, everything's good, we're back to stability. See, we didn't give up everything, and we're back in a stable situation. I think that's what they're trying to project.
Yeah, and this probably is also why Trump has been so overt about it being a success, etc. Because actually, I mean, I'm not saying it's the opposite, but it's like, as you say, it's very much just backing down from like I mean, his previous approach, which was quite aggressive, and it hasn't worked. So I totally agree. And I guess also like I mean, from the Chinese perspective, like again, like this idea of like self-reliance, I feel like it emerges like here as well. Like not only, I mean, again, for the like, using the like the export on rare earths is like a leverage negotiation tool. I think again like I think what Trump has been mentioning the most together with fentanyl and soybean, I think it was this thing of the rare earths, and like so clearly was something very important for him. And I mean, considering the effect that the ban over certain rare earths export has had in Brussels, I can understand why. I mean, like it's been like a huge also in the EU. So I think like China is very well aware of like the power it has now, and I feel like as you mentioned with soybeans as well, like China has now diversified its trade partners to the point where like I mean, of course, like it's not as convenient if he has to not buy from the US, but I think it won't be like an economic disaster probably because it has diversified enough. Um, but I don't know like what like this means I mean for the future from now on. I mean because there have been like until now there have been like speculations about this major deal between China and the US, and like but what I'm seeing is that like it's very much I don't know, as you say, like trying to kind of tone down the a very shouty approach that Trump has had until now. And it seems to me almost like an attempt to normalize the relationship again. Like like to attempt. I mean, like this morning, like they agreed to like a kind of like trade truce. So
Mm.
I believe this is like as you say, like basically just Trump backing down because the approach was not working. But I don't know, because like Trump's approach has been like so like overtly in this direction. I don't know what the approach will be now, because like I guess like now I mean it's clear that the path onwards is much more normalized and like I mean toned down. So and I don't know how this can be kind of like inserted in Trump's overall narrative on China, and like the approach he has had until now, where he was just being very aggressive with tariffs. And also, as I said before, I think China had all the tools to make it very clear that like certain behaviors are not tolerated, and they have like very powerful negotiating tools. So I wonder how, I mean, how Trump will play this, because now he says this is a huge success, right? But then this is really not in line with what he said before and how he behaved before, where he was like basically thinking, or like at least this was he was saying that like he would have obtained these huge deals out of basically arm twisting the Chinese counterpart. So I don't know how this fits in his narrative now.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and actually, I hope that the grand bargain idea is now pretty much off the table. I don't think that's going to come back. I don't think that's a useful conversation really to be having from the U.S. side, and I don't think it's very realistic from the Chinese side. So I think if we think about it in a different way, though, if we think just about trade and sort of put security off to the side and assume that there isn't going to be any big agreement on security, and nobody's going to give major security concessions one way or the other. If we just think about trade with, for example, Europe, and I'd like to sort of pivot and talk more about Europe in a second, but I think with regard to Europe, it's pretty clear what China wants. Right, China's going to go over the rare earths issue with Europe because they have leverage, and then what does China want from Europe? Well, China wants market access, particularly for things like electric vehicles and train equipment and some other things that and also some of the green tech stuff like solar panels and wind turbines and stuff, some of which is not as freely given access to Europe as China would like. And so China wants market access. For those things, if Europe can give that access to China, which maybe it will, maybe it won't, China will be more happy, I think, to supply the rare earths to Europe. But with the US, it's not as obvious, right? So I mean, the China will so if China supplies rare earths to the U.S. or gives agreement to whatever the U.S. wants on trade, and sort of they work out a deal somehow over trade. What does China want from the U.S.? Right? What can the U.S. meaningfully give to China? It isn't clear to me. I mean, they can reduce tariffs further, go back to sort of the old normal from before the first Trump administration under real WTO rules. Um, that would be a huge concession for the U.S. given where Trump has staked out his position. But it's not even obvious to me that China really wants that. Like it's not clear to me what is the main thing that the U.S. could give to China. And then the last point about rare earths I would make is that yes, the U.S. is trying to maneuver around China this way. I think Europe would like to as well, although it hasn't gone quite as far in a coordinated way. Individual European countries are doing this. In the UK, for example, there's an attempt to develop rare earth mining in Cornwall, as well as to start looking for sources of rare earths beyond Europe or China, right? Countries like Canada or Japan, or the US, indeed, that can supply some of these. And the US itself has these huge endowments of rare earths. But it will take many years, possibly decades, to develop both the mining and the smelting and refining capacity, really to get away from this fairly dominant position that China has. So this particular bargaining chip is going to be there for a while, no matter what other countries do, right? Even if everybody decides we're going to try to go around this. So I think the two things then I'll stop with and then throw back over to you is that on the one hand, I feel like it's fairly clear what China would want from Europe to come to a more stable trade agreement. It isn't clear what they'd want from the U.S. And then the second point is, how does that actually play in Europe? I detect some degree of disunity among European Union member states and lack of coordination, frankly, from the UK in terms of what does Europe want from China, and then what is Europe willing to give up, if anything, to get that.
Yeah. So on what China wants from the US, yeah, I agree. It's not clear but when you were talking, I was actually thinking like one thing that when during like the talks between Xi and Trump this morning, one thing that Trump was really like, I mean, protective about was the access to sensitive tech. For example, he mentioned like NVIDIA, Blackwell AI processor. So, and I think like in a sense, like I mean, I'm not saying this is what China wants, but like this is something that would be certainly very useful because I'm thinking like it fits very well in this overarching goal of like advancing as a technological power. I mean, as we said before, this is what is like a very important point that emerged from the plenary. And then, like, I think also you mentioned chips, and again, like I mean, the American export controls on chips, like, I mean, advances. I mean, China's access to advanced chips, and therefore, like the possibility of becoming a very well developed and a really powerful power in the field of AI, which I think fits in the scope of overall becoming a tech leader. So I think probably, I mean, I'm not saying this is what China wants. I don't know that, but I think like this, I think are two things that would be very useful to China to achieve their overall goal in this sense. And probably if there was the openness from the US to give China access to these things, like probably that will open up a lot of doors. But again, like I don't think that will ever happen, and I don't think that that should happen as well. So I mean, this is one thing. And then in regard to Europe, you mentioned like China wants access to the European market. And I would say like I mean, this problem of reciprocal market access has been like, I mean, really at the cornerstone of the challenges that Europe has been facing with China, because it's not only China that wants access to the European market, but importantly is also the EU and single European member states that want access to the Chinese market. And this has been going on forever, and like China has been very restrictive in opening up its market, especially in like particularly profitable fields. I also think there are like some probably ideological problems that also hinder like reciprocity market access. I'm thinking like about the freezing of the comprehensive agreement on investment in 2020 that was frozen after China sanctioned EU like members of the European Parliament, but over like issues on the issue of Xinjiang. So there is highly contentious for China. So I think like there are like different layers to this problem, and also I guess like China will never obtain like further access to European market until China does not, until China like allows European actors to access the Chinese market more, because that's been like a huge problem on the European side, not being able to access certain sectors of the Chinese market, and like China not being very open in this regard. And also you mentioned like you mentioned like lack of coordination in Europe, and I completely agree with. I mean, this is like the main problem that not only the EU, but like you mentioned the UK as well. Like Europe in general is facing. Like I mean, on paper, like the EU, especially as a framework, but Europe in general is trying to portray itself as a unitary pole almost. And I mean, there have been a lot of talks, especially recently, about strategic autonomy, and like this Trump administration has brought about a lot of challenges in this regard, but I don't see any like concrete improvement in that sense. I don't see the EU specifically and Europe more widely as a unitary actor. I think also on the Chinese side, this is very clear. When China wants to agree on like certain things or like to close deals, like it always tries to do that at the bilateral level first. So I think this is also like a clear it flags quite clearly that China prefers to handle the relations with Europe at this level. I mean, and then another problem is like what you mentioned about time. So you say like, and this I think is the main problem with the whole like de-risking strategy, because realistically, you mentioned like the UK's like plans for Cornwall, and like I think that is all good, but then like there is, I don't know, at least 3 decades like between now and like when that could realistically happen. And also, I think even when that will happen, we have no idea if that will be like enough to be completely strategically autonomous. So I guess in the meantime, like the challenge is to balance the relations with China really, and accept the fact that there is a level of reliance, and that needs to be handled in a way that can't be like complete de-risking, because that is not feasible at all. And at the same time, I think on the Chinese side, there needs to be some more opening. Again, like the issue of reciprocal market access, I think is really, really key here. I mean, it's something China wants, but mainly, I mean, it's something European countries have been wanting for a very long time, and China has not been open this. So I think there are a lot of, challenges and gaps in the relationship that need to be addressed, because like engagement is not only necessary, but it's like, I mean, it will be something that we have to bank on for at least, I mean, as I say, like in the mid to long term, especially in sensitive fields such as the rare arts. Yeah.
Yeah, so I guess the last sort of question that I'll pose, and then I'm hopeful maybe we'll get some audience questions as well. So far, we don't have any in that Q&A tab. So if you in the audience would like to ask questions, please do so by typing it into the Q&A tab. But the last question that I'll pose then is, has anything really changed in the last 2 weeks? So this past week, we've seen these high-level summitry in Southeast Asia and in South Korea. And then, before that, last week, we saw the fourth plenum of the 20th Party Congress. And so theoretically, we might expect these to be really important kind of watershed moments in Chinese domestic politics last week and in China's international relations this week. Have they been? Or is it just way too soon to tell? Or is it all just kind of nothing?
I guess it's too soon to tell. But also my impression is that, um, I mean, a lot of what's come out overtly is actually confirmation of the previous trend. So I like, I mean, with the for plenum, I guess like as you said, like the discourse on security is not new. I mean, it's been, I think it's been I mean, it's been highlighted with way more focus than before. The whole like issue of self-reliance has been highlighted, with more focus than before. But it's not like complete novelty, and I don't think it changes anything. In particular from now on. I think like China's approach was already going that direction of like becoming, a rule maker in the words of Xi Jinping. So like, and becoming like a very important actor on a technological level, and especially in certain sectors such as AI, quantum, blah blah blah. So like, I think like that was already the path China was on. I just think it really what happened is that like these points have been like confirmed and highlighted way more assertively and overtly. With the and the same I think with the ASEAN meeting, I think like and the expansion of the agreement. I mean, China, I think, was already going in that direction of like diversifying and strengthening relations with its trade partners. And I mean, is a particularly timely strategy as well, considering what's happened in the past year with Trump's trade war. So I think that's pretty much like confirms the direction that China was following in that sense. And I mean, with the meeting of this morning between Xi and Trump, I think that's really too early to tell. But my impression, as I said before, is that like really confirms things and that were decided before. And just as you say, like it was just a way to kind of like tone down Trump's the really aggressive approach that was clearly not working, because like arm twisting China into like this deal was clearly not working on the Chinese side. So and I guess like I mean, of course, like things have happened, but I guess like the results are not. I mean, I don't see like a big I don't know, a big change in the direction of China's approach, both in its domestic policy making and its foreign policy. I don't know what you think of that. It may also be that it's really too early to tell, and like we will hear more in the next few weeks or in the next months, and then there will be a big change. So yeah, I don't know what you think of this.
Very briefly, I think that what we see from the fourth plenum is basically a placeholder, right? That there's a number of sort of long-term trends that have been in progress, and then there's possibly some short-term shifts or more acute things that are going to happen later. But we're not yet much further along the path of those long-term trends or upon the moment of those acute transitions. So, nothing really happened from that in that we can read now. It may be that we look back on that in a year or two and think it was really important, but probably not in and of itself. But it sort of stands in these bigger processes in ways that aren't yet quite clear, and that it hasn't really done a lot to advance or change. In terms of China's international relations, I actually do think the one significant thing to come out of this is working out this agreement with Trump and announcing that today. I actually think that's quite important because it vindicates a certain kind of foreign policy approach when it comes to handling the United States in this very vexing area for China of trade and trade negotiations. So if this is the way to do it, they've kind of found the magic formula for handling this crazy beast that the United States has become from their perspective. And that could really mean a lot in terms of the way that China chooses to pursue its American relationship in the future, at least for the next few years. It's telling actually that when we were talking about sort of what could the U.S. give to China, what you brought up, I think quite astutely, was the CHIPS Act and the restrictions on export of technologies for very high-end semiconductor manufacturing to China. In fact, though, those restrictions are not Trump's to begin with. I mean, he's kept them in place, but that was legislation advanced and passed under the Biden administration. And it was something that Biden was really in favor of doing that Trump had shied away from doing in his first term. And so, in that sense, it isn't just Trump. In other words, there's a larger kind of trade conflict potentially between the U.S. and China. But if China's found a way at least of handling Trump and of handling the current face of the U.S. administration and the way the U.S. does this kind of trade business, I think that's a major advance from China's perspective and how to handle this foreign policy. There's a couple questions from the audience. I'll go ahead and read both of them and then we can take them in order before we wrap up. So the first question says, how do you see the Belt and Road Initiative playing out in the future? And what will be the implications for ASEAN? And the second question is, what do you think are the implications of Trump wanting to restart nuclear weapons testing? Will China follow suit? Do you want to take a stab at either of those?
So yes, I can maybe if I can take the first
Sure.
because so the with the future of the Belt and Road Initiative, I think the Belt and Road Initiative has basically been rebranded.
Mm,
So I don't think it's dead, but I don't think it is what it used to be before COVID and the financial challenges that the Belt and Road Initiative has experienced after COVID. I think the Global Governance Initiative is basically inheriting the ethos that was underlying the Belt and Road Initiative. Is something very similar. I think the different initiatives that fall under the umbrella of the GGI are really following what the BRI was trying to do before. So, like to create an area where basically the US are excluded, where China can foster its relationships and the and economic relations with some like I don't know exclusive partners. So I think like the in terms of like what is the future and how is this related to Asian and the direction we take with Asian, I think the future of the Belt and Road Initiative is that it will continue through this new initiative, and like the I mean, I believe the direction will be that of continuing to foster these relations and this narrative of win-win. This I mean, we saw this a lot during the I think during the Asian summit during the
mm.
meeting. This idea of like win-win and like being portraying China as the responsible power. I mean, in the global south more in general, but specifically in the Asian neighborhood. I think this is like something very important for China, and like the BRI was certainly a very important tool towards this direction. I think now relations with BRI partners will continue in that direction, even maybe without the umbrella of the BRI. And I mean the fostering relations with like pan-regionally with Asian, I think like really falls within this goal. So like to diversify and strengthen China's trade partners, and to send the message that China is the responsible actor in that part of the world and in general. And I think like I mean Trump's approach in the past year has really helped China in disseminating this narrative, and also probably I mean if not through the BRI, like China will try to continue to deepen relations with partners it's interested in with other frameworks that will be treated in a similar way. So I think Asian is a framework that allows to do that in a region that is extremely important, if not the most important for China. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, on that note, I think Belt and Road as Belt and Road may well be done, or at least largely done. But I agree. I think this whole global governance initiative is important and sort of envelops what had been done under this moniker of Belt and Road, but now really is a more concerted attempt by China to kind of rewrite the rules of the game, or at least to rethink some of the institutions of the way the world operates, right? So and clearly this has been in the works for a little while. I mean, when I was in Beijing over the summer, everyone wanted to talk about this 全球治理, and everything now coming from official channels in China is all about 全球治理, global governance, again and again and again. But this was true even before Xi Jinping made the speech in Tianjin to launch this idea. So I think this has been something for a long time that people have been thinking about, at least for a few years. Really, since the 20th Party Congress, when these global initiatives were first pushed, some of the others, so there's global security and so on. And so, for at least the last few years, I think there's been a kind of building out of this concept of what can China offer the world in terms of a institutional framework, either to fix what's broken or that the U.S. is reneging on or pulling down, that was built after the Second World War, or to kind of reshape areas of that with which China is not terribly satisfied and with which China senses many other countries maybe aren't satisfied. If we think specifically about ASEAN countries and the Belt and Road projects, the main country still receiving significant Belt and Road investments and assistance is Indonesia. And most other countries in ASEAN are not getting a tremendous amount from that program. And the Indonesian receipt of Belt and Road funding and investment very much fits in with the priorities of the administration of Prabowo Subianto, the current president, as well as his predecessor, Joko Widodo, in attracting foreign investment generally and building out infrastructure. Now, the thing is, a lot of that infrastructure has already been built out, that which was going to come under this Belt and Road Initiative anyway, right? So things like airports, upgraded roads, trains, etc. There could be more of that, but I think what Indonesia really wants, and where there's been a real success from the Indonesian perspective in managing the China trade relationship, is in enacting actually restrictions and regulations to compel or cajole China to invest in more downstream production of certain things, right? So what China wants from the relationship to some extent is access to nickel resources and to develop nickel mining, as has been happening, as well as some other minerals. But what Indonesia has done is basically to force investment then in smelters and battery factories and even car factories in Indonesia, which from the Indonesian perspective has been immensely successful, right? So that sort of forcing more trade and not caring as much about aid, right? And sort of longer term investment in sectors that are really going to generate jobs and create greater value added has been a useful strategy that Indonesia has adopted, that at the same time has not jeopardized either the overall trading relationship, which is booming with China, or indeed the continuation of what remains of the Belt and Road investments and initiatives, which have been very substantial over the past number of years, although they're somewhat winding down. So I think, different countries in ASEAN may or may not be able to pursue a similar strategy to Indonesia. Indonesia has certain things that most other countries don't. It has a huge scale. It has endowments of certain minerals. It's strategically located. It's the largest country in ASEAN. I mean, in many ways, it has lots of advantages over a smaller country with fewer resource endowments or in a less strategic position. But I think there are lessons to be learned from Indonesia's experience in terms of how to manage a positive economic relationship with China. And I should also just point out, Indonesia has some not insignificant security reservations about China and always has, and has historically had a very difficult relationship with China for much of modern history. And so even now, there are these security reservations, at least on the Indonesian side, but that hasn't stopped the trade relationship from booming. And both sides have been sort of able to work around that. And so I think that may be something from which countries like the Philippines or Vietnam, for example, could learn or make use of that example to do something in their own way. And let me just speak very briefly to this nuclear testing issue. Trump doesn't necessarily want to restart nuclear testing, I hope. And hopefully that was just him blustering before this meeting with Xi Jinping? I don't know, obviously, but restarting nuclear testing would be foolish for the United States or for any other of the major nuclear powers. There hasn't been any real nuclear testing for 30 years, as far as I'm aware, right? China's not testing nuclear weapons or anything else. What I think is interesting is that there is a perception in China, at least in some circles, that the United States is looking to upgrade its nuclear weapons arsenal in such a way that it would reduce China's ability for a second strike, right? So essentially, China's nuclear posture has always been that China will not strike first with nuclear weapons, but if struck, it will counterstrike, right? So there'll be a second strike coming back from China against whoever attacks China with nuclear weapons. And to that end, for many years, China maintained a kind of minimal deterrent, just enough to be able credibly to say that, don't attack me or else I will counterattack you in a devastating way. As opposed to, say, the United States or the Soviet Union that were building thousands and thousands and thousands of missiles and warheads over the Cold War. China never did that. But now China's perceiving, at least in some circles, it seems that the US is trying to upgrade such that it would be able to neutralize China's capacity for that counterstrike. And the United States, conversely, looking at China, sees that China is significantly expanding the size of its nuclear arsenal. Nothing like the United States or Russia, but quite a bit at a quite rapid clip compared to what China had earlier. And so there is this potential, and maybe more than potential, for a kind of nuclear arms competition or arms race between the United States and China that's beginning to take off. And so in that context, it may be that, threatening things like nuclear testing or other kinds of risky maneuvers or semi-legal maneuvers. I mean, the U.S. is still a party, I believe, to the Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, and I don't think that's lapsed and isn't due to lapse immediately. But, sort of threatening escalation may be a tactic to try to either get China to agree to some kind of trade concessions that maybe hadn't been fully cemented, but more likely perhaps to kind of open the door to some kind of negotiation around arms control. But it's not clear that that's really going to be a very fruitful pathway. I don't see arms control as a major agenda item on which the U.S. and China could agree. But I do think there is this sort of nuclear arms race issue brewing between the U.S. and China, and brewing at a fairly high temperature. But as to why Trump said that before the meeting with Xi, I don't know, and I think he was probably just talking. This is one way to put it. Just sort of empty talk would be my read on it. What did you think, Alicia, of this?
Yeah, I completely agree. I would say it was mainly like posturing and like very Trump, like very much in his style, to say this. I mean, I find like with his approach toward China, he often, says this really, impacting things that sound really crazy or really big, and then like nothing happens, or like they will be toned down, et cetera, et cetera. And I think like this, as you say, like this should be read in this way. I don't believe he had. I mean, I hope so, but I don't believe he has any concrete, intention in this sense. I think it's more like posturing and just like saying something that's really shocking, and really that sounds really big and really impacting before the meeting. Yeah.
Great. With that, I think we're pretty much at the conclusion of today's discussion. So thank you very much, everyone in the audience, for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.